Stephen Browdy is a legend when it comes to the convergence of parapsychology and philosophy. He's the 2022 winner of the Parapsychological Association's prestigious Outstanding Career Award, an award given to individuals whose efforts have advanced the discipline of parapsychology for over 2 decades. He's a professor emeritus at the University of Maryland, and in 2014 he was awarded the FWH Myers Memorial Medal from the Society of Psychical Research. Stephen has written numerous books, including The Gold Leaf Lady and Immortal Remains. Scroll into the description for timestamps, extra info, and useful links. And if you enjoy this video, please like, comment, and share. Thank you. Thank you so much for doing this with me, Steve. I really appreciate it. And thank you to our mutual friend, Ed Kelly, for connecting us. To start us off today, can you please talk a little bit about your background and about your main areas of research interest?
Well, people often ask me how a nice guy like me got into a field like this. And I trace it back to something that happened when I was in graduate school. I was busy writing a dissertation on temporal logic. I fancied myself to be a kind of hard-nosed physicalist, not for any particularly good reason. It was just a kind of intellectual conceit I was cultivating in those days. And it was a slow day in Northampton, Massachusetts, and a couple friends came over. We'd seen the only movie in town. We were trying to think of something to do. And they said, well, let's play this game called Table Up. What they meant was, let's have a seance.
Right.
Now, they thought it was a game, and they played the game a few times, and they found it very enjoyable. And none of us knew anything about parapsychology. And to the extent we knew anything about it, we pretty much dismissed it. But for the next 3 hours in my house in broad daylight, I saw my table tilt in the air and lift under our fingers. We were standing next to the table. Our knees were not doing any work here. This was my table. My friends were not practical jokers. I don't even think they had a sense of humor. They were too busy becoming politically radicalized and wanting to blow up power stations.
Right.
And I should mention we weren't stoned. And
No
this went on
substances involved.
This went on for 3 hours, and it was very impressive. We ostensibly communicated with 3 different entities. The first was John Wayne, who had recently died. The second was the mythical river Styx. So I think that was at least not a genuine communication. And the third was from someone who claimed to have built the spooky old house that I lived in. Oh, I should mention that because my friends knew nothing about parapsychology, they didn't know the standard spiritist practice of asking yes or no questions and having the table nod and say once for yes, twice for no. What they did was they had the table nod once for the letter A, twice for the letter B.
26 times.
So,
yeah.
So you can see why it took 3 hours to communicate with only 3 people, communicators. But the third communicator claimed to be named Horace T. Jeckham. He may have botched the spelling given our cumbersome code. And I figured, well, this is something I can at least try to confirm. So I went to City Hall, but it turned out the house was so old it antedated the city records. So I never found out if anyone with a name similar to Horace T. Jeckham built a house. But the fact remains that this table was rising under our fingers, and it scared the shit out of me.
Yeah.
And I didn't know what to make of it. I literally put it out of my mind because I knew my mentors wouldn't be very receptive to it. And I just totally forgot about it. And then years later, when I had gotten my PhD, published over respectable articles in temporal logic and philosophy of language, I remembered what happened, and I got tenure. I remembered what happened back in graduate school, and I figured if I was an honest and serious philosopher, I needed to come to grips with this. I knew that some well-known philosophers had taken parapsychology seriously. So I read what they had to say, and I decided there, in fact, was something worth sinking my teeth into. And the rest, I guess, is history. I figured I would have some protection from tenure, and I did. I had some protection, but it didn't protect me from abuse. So I didn't have to lose my job, fortunately. It retarded my promotion to full professor at one. So I learned a lot about the academic community from all of this. But anyway, I assumed, like many others, that if there was respectable evidence in parapsychology, it would come from laboratory experiments. So my first book on parapsychology dealt with the laboratory evidence for ESP and PK. And then I realized if I was an honest philosopher, I needed at least to know about the evidence that I figured was not worth studying.
Yeah.
Because some people had taken it seriously. And I read the literature on macro PK and physical mediumship, and it bowled me over. What I realized was that the people who had been denouncing this material and dismissing it were just blowing it out of their ass, frankly. I mean, they didn't know what they were talking about, yet they feigned confidence in their strong opinions about the worthlessness of the material. And they must have known that they didn't know what the material was. What they had done was simply to take the word of other people who were equally ignorant of just how good the case material was. And so I cranked out a book on physical mediumship. And then I realized that if I was going to continue in this field, I wanted at some point when I was more chronologically challenged to write a book on survival. But then I realized if I was going to do that, I needed to come to grips with multiple personality and dissociation and hypnosis, because many of the phenomena from the field of dissociation resemble what you see in cases of mediumship. And so I wrote a book on multiple personality and got quite involved for a while in the community of people studying that phenomenon. And then I got around to writing my book on survival. And that's basically the story.
Wow. And I'm sure, obviously, those are the highlights. It's a much longer story if we went into all the details. But wow. Firstly, the thing that happened to you in graduate school with the table. I was planning to ask you about that a bit later, but since you've brought it up, we're going to have to kind of dive into that right now. I mean, it's just an unbelievable experience that must have completely shaken you up, like shook you to your core, I would imagine. Like, where do I even begin with that, really? You know, like, so what were you studying at the time?
Well, I was working on my PhD in philosophy.
In philosophy,
I was writing a dissertation on temporal logic and the philosophy of language. And I had no contact with this material at all. When I was much younger, there used to be a TV show, I think I watched in the 1950s. I think it was called One Step Beyond. And they purported to dramatize cases from the Society for Psychical Research in London.
Right.
And I thought at that time, it would be really cool to be a parapsychologist. But then puberty hit and I focused elsewhere.
Yeah.
So oddly enough, when I studied briefly in London, studying English and philosophy, I lived in Kensington, and I would walk past the old address for the SPR, One Adam and Eve Mews, one of the great addresses in all of history. And I didn't know it was there. And that's how detached I was from parapsychology until my graduate school experience.
Yeah. And so were you kind of, what were your thoughts on like the veracity of that kind of phenomena at that point? Like were you kind of open to the potential of parapsychological phenomena being real, or like were you kind of considering most of that sort of stuff fantasy at that point? Like if you said, I think you said you were a physicalist.
I probably would have dismissed it somewhat contemptuously.
Mm-hmm.
But it just took me by surprise. And I've often wondered about why it scared me. And I think that the reason had to do with the fact that, for all I know, one of us sitting around the table might have been the cause of the phenomenon.
Yeah.
And that has enormous implications, which I saw only very dimly at the time.
Yeah.
And the implication is simply that if we can have that kind of effect on the world around us, who knows what havoc we might be wreaking just unconsciously all the time.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I can think of a number of reasons why it could be scary to have that kind of experience, out of the blue for somebody that, you're not expecting it. So again, just to go back to it, you were having this idea of, they wanted to do this seance, and I guess they wanted to do it for a bit of fun, mostly because you said they weren't into this stuff either. It was just kind of, like
it was a game for them. Yes.
Yeah. And how quickly did things start? So you're kind of all putting your hands on this table, and like, what, are you still talking and joking around at that point, or are you kind of like half taking it seriously? Like, what's the vibe in the room at that point?
It took about 20 minutes for the table to shudder and start to move. Mm-hmm. And during that time, I mean, I can't say what they were thinking, but they purported to be thinking the words to themselves: table up, table up, table up, and try to visualize the table rising. And that's what I did. And it's suddenly at one point it happened.
Wow. So you said it started to like shudder and shake and kind of move a little bit. And then after, I don't know roughly how long, it just pops into the air.
Yeah. After about 20 minutes it rose.
And then are you kind of talking to each other? Like, are you doing that? What are you doing? Like, are you somehow doing this? Or what's going on?
Well, I could see they weren't, because we were standing next to the table. Our fingers touching it like this. And
you have to go up a little bit more. I didn't quite see your fingers. Oh. So it's just like fingertips on the top of the table.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. And if one person left the room temporarily, it was just the two of us sitting there, and the table rose under our fingers, not at the opposite end. So it was exciting, but intimidating.
Yeah.
And on one hand, I wanted to think about it. On the other hand, I wanted just to put it aside.
Yeah. I mean, wow. And it shook you up. Like, how did that kind of change your life in that moment? Do you think, I mean, obviously looking back, it changed the entire trajectory possibly of your life, or at least seemed to. But yeah, how do you think that affected your thinking and everything? And
I literally put it out of mind, because I knew my mentors would have been resistant to it. Yeah. The funny thing about that is I later learned that one of my mentors believed he had a ghost in his house. But like lots of the people I know in academia, they confide these things to me, but they don't admit it to their less sympathetic colleagues.
Yeah.
My dissertation advisor had an apparitional experience, which he confessed only to me.
Yeah.
My father-in-law from a previous marriage, a scientist at Ohio State University, had an apparitional experience, which he confided only to me. The clinicians I met in my study of multiple personality often had apparently psychic episodes with their patients, but they confided that only to me. So, I mean, part of what that shows is just how cutthroat the academic community really is.
And how ingrained the taboo and stigma is with this kind of stuff.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And that's still the case today. I would imagine there's so many more people having these kind of experiences than people realize, right? Like, as you say, most people don't, especially scientists and people with academics, don't feel comfortable to talk about it. Yeah, wow. What an incredible experience. And like you said, regardless of what was happening with the communications, which we don't need to go into in depth now, like the fact that the table was doing that, like, did you have any doubt? I guess last kind of question about it for now. Did you have any doubt in your mind that it happened? Like were you kind of questioning yourself, like, did I somehow, hallucinate that? Did I daydream that? Was there some alternate thing happening there? Like, did you question yourself thoroughly, and like kind of, did it start to drive you mad, a little bit, like this unbelievable experience?
Not that I recall. I mean, it was too obvious.
Yeah, and you just put it out of your mind. It was too obvious that
I wasn't ready to deal with it. I was too determined to get a dissertation done, and get a job and get tenure.
Yeah, it would have taken too much thinking, too much mind processing power to really digest that. And
I was not ready to deal with it. Yeah, I was not ready.
Yeah, I totally understand. I mean, even now that I'm looking into all of this stuff, and I'm aware of the reality of a lot of this stuff, I still think if I had a totally undeniable experience of, like, something on a macro scale, like, I'm not sure how I would really deal with that. That would be really intense, to actually have it there, concrete, an experience like that. So yeah,
it was, and now I'm jaded.
Yeah. Yeah, it's never going to be never going to have that kind of 0 to that again, I guess.
Well, I've seen weirder stuff since, but
yeah, I bet. Hopefully we'll get to a few of those today.
Okay.
Yeah, I definitely want to hear some of the weirder stuff. To kind of give you a really, difficult question to answer, or something that you can just kind of wax lyrical a little bit about, and just go wherever you want with this. I just want to get your thoughts on, again, it's a big question, thoughts on consciousness and like theories of consciousness, and just is physicalism dead? Is consciousness non-local? Is it fundamental? What's the role of the brain? All of these kind of things. Just share your thoughts, again, if possible, to summarize these kind of things, because again, I know that by itself is a many hours long conversation and whatnot. But yeah, just ramble a little bit for me.
Well, one of the things I'd say, I guess, would be that I'm an anti-mechanist. It's not so much a matter of hardware. I'm not sure what to say about the ultimate nature of the hardware of the universe, whether it's mental, whether it's physical, whether it's neutral and can be sliced and diced in any number of ways. I don't believe there is such a thing as an ultimate description of nature. And so I've pretty much lost patience with people who are trying to answer that kind of question. I think it's more important to understand that if we want to know what's happening in the mind, what human behavior is like, what memory is like, we need to stop thinking mechanistically. Stop trying to explain behavior as if it's emitted in the way that a computer or a machine, or I would say I think it's more important to counter the idea that we can explain behavior as if, or explain mentality as if it's something emitted by an organism, or explained totally in terms of what's going on inside the person. Memory is my favorite example of that. I don't think you can explain memory as in terms of a memory trace. And there's a bigger issue here about how we explain things in science. Most scientists assume that wherever explanation stops, wherever we try to analyze phenomena and ask how a phenomenon occurs, that we must always appeal to some very small level. Most scientists agree that explanation by analysis in terms of lower level processes can't go on indefinitely. Sooner or later, you have to come to some basic phenomena, some phenomenon or process or regularity about which we can no longer ask how it occurs. It's simply the way the universe works. Nothing deeper explains why it works in that way. I call this, and that's fine, by the way. What scientists also assume, and this I challenge, is that wherever explanation by analysis stops, it's always at the level of the very small, the atomic level, the subatomic level, the biochemical level, the neurological level, whatever it is, never at the level of behavior, for example. Now, that's just an assumption. It's not an empirically established fact. And I think there are persuasive reasons, very complex reasons, for challenging it.
You wrote the book First Person Plural about multiple personality, which is a fascinating phenomenon. I've touched on that with a couple of my guests in the past. What are your thoughts on that, on multiple personality, and what do you think it can tell us about consciousness, about how things work?
Well, I think we don't really understand the nature of human abilities.
Yeah.
We often talk as if we do understand the nature of human abilities, but there are a lot of mysteries that remain.
Mm.
It's fascinating, for example, that multiples can differ so profoundly from one alter identity to another.
Yeah.
So one alter personality can be addicted to drugs and another not. One might have allergies and another not. If a multiple has been abused by being burned with cigarettes and you switch to that alter identity, you'll see scars appear on the body. And then if you switch out of that alter identity, the scars will disappear.
Mm. Wow. Yeah. That's incredible.
And this connects with things we've learned from hypnosis as well about the latency of human abilities. It may be that only certain kinds of exotic conditions will elicit capacities that we didn't know we had. It's interesting. There are some multiples who, in college, if they're functional multiples, divide their coursework among alters with the appropriate skills. So the artistic alter will take the art class, the mathematically adept alter will take the statistics class, and so on.
Fascinating.
And this connects with another area that we don't really understand, and that is the study of savants and prodigies.
That was going to be one of the next things I was going to mention to you. Yeah, absolutely.
All of this weaves together in a complex stew of issues about the nature of human abilities and how we study them. The thing about savants is that some of them are profoundly dysfunctional normally, except for some extraordinary abilities that they have, which usually you think would be incompatible with their deficits. So there's one savant who's spastic until he sits down to play the piano. There are calculating savants who can factor any number you give to them, but can't add the change in their pocket.
Wow. Yeah. It's so bizarre, right?
These are things we simply don't understand. We don't understand prodigies either. I mean, or the conditions that elicit or that help to fashion the way in which a prodigy's skills are developed. I mean, a violin prodigy needs an instrument to manifest that particular skill. I just remembered something that's probably not relevant, but it reminded me of a comment made. This is something that'll just amuse you, but it has nothing to do with what we were just talking about, except that I learned this while studying about savants. A comment made by a high school superintendent in the US, probably from the South. He was trying to explain why he was prohibiting foreign languages to be taught in high school.
Right.
And what he said was, if English was good enough for Jesus, it's good enough for you.
That is brilliant. You gotta love that. That says a lot, right?
It has no relevance to what we're talking about, but it popped into my head. So
It's still the human condition. That's the relevance, I guess. But yeah. Well, yeah, savants. Well, yeah, that's where we were, which is, yeah, just unbelievable. So you said if you like, we don't, understand that. We don't know what to do with that. What about you personally in terms of your musings? Like, what do you think might be going on there with kind of these sorts of things, these sorts of phenomena, savant and genius, prodigy, what have you?
I wish I knew. What I've made, where I have found this to be particularly relevant is in considering how we study people, apparent psychic abilities. I mean, one of my most frequent complaints about psi research is that it's all laboratory research is almost ludicrously premature. We have no idea what kind of capacity we're trying to bring into a laboratory situation.
Yeah.
We don't know what the natural history of psychic functioning is. And studies in hypnosis, multiple personality, savantism, prodigies, and so on, just reinforces. I mean, even among savants and prodigies, there are limitations to what they can do. We all have a prodigiously gifted violinist may not be able to play the piano or compose music or do any number of other things. A skilled athlete may be good only at playing certain positions in football, baseball, or what have you.
Or only on good days where they had a certain amount of sleep or something as well, right?
Well, that's a related issue. That is, our abilities are situation sensitive, context relevant. I mean, just about every capacity we have is situation sensitive. Our capacity to digest food, to relax, to sleep. Not to mention normal abilities like the ability to recite a poem from memory or dock a space capsule or a parallel park or whatever it may be. These can be undermined in any number of different ways. And of course, this is relevant because so many critics of psi research like to say, well, if you've got a certain ability just demonstrated under these rigid and artificial conditions.
Yeah.
Years ago, the BBC did a program on the case for ESP, and they interviewed psychologist C.E.M. Hansel. And Hansel stupidly said, well, it should be easy to determine if you have telepathic ability. Just tell me what I'm thinking. And I'm so sorry his interlocutor didn't say to him, oh, really, Professor Hansel? Well, will you demonstrate a penile erection for us?
Yeah.
I'm sure if Hansel had been unable to comply, he would have resisted the conclusion that he's simply unable to get it up.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we have lots of interesting abilities in real life situations, and it's not clear whether they can be imported or exported into an artificial laboratory situation. The kind of psi you see in laboratory experiments is straitjacketed psi. It's not what psi is presumably doing out in the wild, in the world.
Just made me think of, when I'm like back in school or university and stuff, and how many people around you, like fellow students would say things like, oh, I'm awful at exams. I know what the topic, the subject matter and everything like that, but I just can't do it in those conditions and that kind of thing. And it's exactly what we're talking about. It's some people just, you function, you can't just capture something necessarily and bottle it and just have it work on as and when you click your fingers.
Of course. My students used to call this the fart factor because most people can fart only in the presence of certain other people.
Yeah.
And you could say some people can only sing in the presence of certain other people. They need to feel safe.
Yeah.
And That's true of most abilities. And uh, if you want to understand how psi works, or if you want to understand anything about the nature of human abilities, you have to study it in the wild, in real life situations. If you want to study a tennis player's ability to return serves, you have to do it in a situation where the opponents are trying their hardest to win.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think it's still, I mean, I'm sure you agree that it still has value to study it in the lab, and there has been lots of interesting, results on that. But I completely get and agree with what you're saying.
Yeah, I would
We're never
challenge
gonna. Oh yeah, okay, go for it.
no, I actually think laboratory experiments in parapsychology have been pretty useless on the whole.
Really?
I, in my opinion, they've been both unconvincing and unilluminating. They've been unconvincing because, oddly enough, even most parapsychologists debate the status of laboratory experiments. I'm a member of a listserv of psi researchers and insiders. And every so often, somebody in the group says, how many of members of this listserv would say categorically that they believe that psi abilities exist? And you'd be surprised how many of the members of the list will not commit themselves to
that. Yeah.
And now one reason.
Sorry.
I'm sorry.
No, reason,
you first.
No, I was just gonna say, I was just gonna question if it's like that kind of 1% doubt thing, or if they have genuine, like large amount of doubt. But sorry, you continue. I didn't mean to interrupt.
I'm not sure about that, but
yeah.
I think that varies.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing is that if they're basing their judgment mostly on laboratory evidence, the evidence is quantitative, and it's just inherently unconvincing. It's all too easy for parapsychological skeptics or just fence sitters to think that the positive results are the result of some mistake somewhere, some number fiddling. I mean, most successful psi experiments are significant at the 0.01 level or 001. And while some of them reach staggering levels of significance, they're infrequent enough so that doubt can easily creep in. And meta-analyses don't help much because people question the meta-analyses for any number of reasons. I mean, the experiments are never exactly the same. I mean, replication is a complex issue too. And no experiment is ever exactly replicated. It's a very loose notion.
Yeah, as long as you've got different people, it's already different, right?
And of course, and besides, not all sciences depend on replicable experiments. Astronomy, meteorology, and behavioral sciences. And it's unilluminating to focus just on laboratory experiments because once again, we don't know what we're dealing with when we're looking at the phenomena only in a straitjacketed laboratory context. I think if you want to understand the way psi functions naturally, you've got to look at cultures where it's accepted, for one thing. And for another, you can look at people who are unusually lucky or unlucky. That's my favorite.
I had that written down. That's again, I heard you say something along those lines. Usually unlucky or unlucky, and the same with health, right? Unusually like unhealthy or healthy, and the same kind of it applies. And I thought that was really profound. It really kind of just clicked with me when you said that. So please carry on. I don't want to interrupt. I don't want to interrupt your train of thought here.
There's a well-known Yiddish distinction between a schlemiel and a schlemazel. A schlemiel is someone who spills soup on himself. A schlemazel has it spilled on him.
Right.
So the idea is that a schlemazel is an unlucky soul, someone the universe is just crapping. And schlemazel's really exist. I was married to a schlemazel. And I'd rather not get into that for various reasons, but her entire family was actually a family of schlemazels. They were lightning rods for misfortune.
Mm.
I lived next door to a married couple of schlemazels. It seemed that I wish I could have determined this. I wish I had known them before they married to see if they were schlemazels individually or whether it had to do with their marriage.
Yeah.
But the fact remains that just about everything they bought was defective. So electronic equipment would fail to work right out of the box. Their cars were always in the shop, even though they had brands noted for their reliability. Their a sturdy wooden rocking chair broke the second day of ownership with their infant son on. And my favorite example of their schlemazel, if this is even a word, the wife bought what she thought was a poster-sized photograph of the Golden Gate Bridge. She had it framed and put on a living room wall. And I had to tell her, Donna, that's the Brooklyn Bridge. Now, I don't know how many of your viewers would know that an old-fashioned image of the sucker or the loser or the gullible person is someone who buys the Brooklyn Bridge from a huckster. Says, hey, you want to buy the Brooklyn Bridge? So this is a woman who both literally and figuratively bought the Brooklyn Bridge.
Yeah.
Wow. So what we don't know is whether this is something like a psychosomatic ailment that they do to themselves, or whether it's something that their mischievous philosopher neighbor was doing to them. And that's why PK is so scary, because if you can move a compass needle or a cigarette a millimeter by thought alone, it's a very small step conceptually from doing that to making somebody drop dead by thought alone. Yeah. So the existence of any PK at all in the world forces us, as we noted earlier, to take seriously this kind of magical worldview, according to which our thoughts can have all sorts of remote consequences, both malevolent and benign, but in which we might have to take responsibility for a range of things we just as soon be bystanders for. So, I mean, there are places in the world where that view of things goes down pretty smoothly, but not in most developed countries. And in fact, science has been making causation increasingly impersonal. And what's interesting about this primitive worldview, we think of as primitive, is that it makes causation very personal. And it may be that there's this web of interactions that is extremely messy, which may be triggered by our unconscious. And that's where the action is. And that's why I'm drawn to spontaneous case material, where I think we can draw connections between, as in poltergeist cases, emotional states and physical phenomena.
Yeah. Yeah, wow, there's so much fascinating stuff there to unpack. I mean, one question, again, I know we're not going to base this one on the science. There is not enough data simply to answer this with any certainty, but how frequent and common do you think, psi experiences, whatever we want to call them, like instances where things are happening for these kinds of reasons? So it might be the schlemazel, maybe I'm pronouncing it wrong, schlemazel kind of things where people just keep getting the bad luck, or it might be, somebody that always seems to have precognitive dreams, or it can be little things, mundane things. How frequent and common do you personally, again, your gut feeling based on everything that you've researched and seen in your life, how common do you think these things actually are?
I don't know about that, because it depends on whether our ordinary psychic activities are observationally indistinguishable from normal events. I mean, if if we psychokinetically cause a car to crash, it may be observationally indistinguishable from a normal case of car failure.
Yeah.
Ordinarily, tables don't rise on their own. So a levitating table will stick out like a sore thumb.
Mm-hmm.
But our psychic activities may be sneakier than that. And part of the problem is that this is called the source of psi problem. We don't know who's causing what and when. That's another reason why laboratory experiments are problematical. I mean, in a PK experiment, it's not as if you can go around with a PK meter and see where the lines of force are.
Yeah.
As far as most experimenters in parapsychology come from some more conventional area of science. Mm-hmm. And they uniformly assume that the people involved in a psi experiment are going to adhere to a kind of ridiculous gentleman's agreement where only the official subject will use only the psychic ability being tested for, and then only at the time when they're supposed to, when the experimenter's gun goes off, so to speak. And that nobody else even remotely connected to the experiment will use whatever psychic abilities they might have to satisfy whatever needs they might have, positive or negative, with respect to the experiment. So for all they know, one of the main contributors to psi experiments results will be an onlooker or the experimenter rather than the official subject. And for all they know, it could be someone living in a trunk of an old car in another part of the universe. And that's why I focus on spontaneous cases or psychic superstars. Because if you have a subject who gets good results over and over with different experimenters in different kinds of situations, even if that person isn't the sole contributor to the final result, you have good reasons for thinking that that person is prima facie involved in the causal network.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think that, you're right, that psi in the wild is where we're going to be able to maybe learn the most about, the potentials and the kind of things that can happen. I still think that psi in the lab, like the experiments hold value, different value, but I think they hold value in the sense, of like maybe convincing some new people that this stuff has, reality to it. Maybe that was one of the things, I guess the table helped a lot with you, but when you researched it, I'm sure that helped. And like even people like Carl Sagan, right? Like he said that the human's ability to influence a random number generator and a couple of other phenomena were worthy of further study. So even him, like people laud as a great skeptic, like it grabbed his attention. And maybe as time progresses, maybe, we're going to figure out ways to improve things in the lab setting, make it more amenable to these things, even if it's never going to be the same as, like you say, in the wild. It's never going to have the same kind of extraordinary phenomena taking place. I
love blind optimism. It's great.
I mean, I'm normally a pessimist, but I'm trying to be optimistic. But I stand by that, and I hope you agree to an extent, at least, that like it still holds value as an accompaniment. Like I think we have to look at both, but again, focusing on the standout cases of incredible macro phenomena is invaluable. And I'd love you to talk, unless there's anything else you want to say on that, I'd love to hear you share some of your experiences with witnessing like incredible examples of macro psychokinesis and other phenomena.
Well, let me just go back to one thing. I do like some of the laboratory experiments. I mean, Schmidt's experiments in apparent retrocausation with pre-recorded targets, I think, are very important because they raise issues about whether we need to appeal to retrocausation, which is something I have a problem with. And if we reject retrocausation as an explanation of Schmidt's results. I think and if we rule out fraud, then we have to think that what's going on is that Schmidt or somebody was just disposing the universe to behave in a certain way that made it look like retrocausation was happening. And for me, that connects with the topic of synchronicity, why there are meaningful coincidences. My preferred account would be to say that we just have the ability to make events turn out in such a way as to satisfy our needs. And when I say that, I don't mean that this is something that is easy or unimpeded. It probably happens very rarely. But I used to know a parapsychologist who thought that the universe was a punster. She thought that all her synchronicities, and she had many of them, she thought, showed that the universe was organizing things around puns. And she was able to impose that perspective on a lot of things that happened in her life. Now, I don't know whether she was just very creative in being able to do that, or whether she actually had the ability to organize events in such a way so that they could be interpreted as cosmic puns. But in that way, her devotion to punsterism, if that's even a word, was exhibited in the kinds of experiences that she had.
Yeah.
I'm not explaining this very well, but
it's kind of like the self-fulfilling prophecy kind of thing. Like if you're
like
expecting to see that kind of thing and you're looking for those patterns, you're going to maybe see more of those patterns, and it's going to fit into your interpretation, I guess.
Well, but I'm going further. I'm suggesting that we might have the ability to roll out events in such a way as to facilitate that kind of interpretation.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I think we have no satisfactory explanation of synchronicity.
Yeah, synchronicities are such a weird one. I really find them, depending on, the incident, the experience, like they're pretty hard for me to wrap my head around a lot of the time. Like the why, not so much it's not believing it or not. Like I can believe people's accounts, it's just how and why that sometimes these things happen like that. I guess I sometimes just put it down to reality is just so much more mysterious and bizarre than I can kind of comprehend.
Well, I'm prepared to believe that for sure.
Yeah.
But I think we might be playing a deeper role in this than we like to think. I mean, when you look at poltergeist cases, there are some features of poltergeist cases that make sense in terms of psychic or psychological trauma or conflicts in the person's life. A classic case is the case of Eleonora Zugun, a Romanian peasant girl who, in the early 20th century, was walking to her grandmother's house. She found some money on the side of the road and used it to buy candy, which she ate on the way to her grandmother's. Her grandmother was reputedly a witch. When she got to her grandmother, she told her what had happened. And the grandmother said, "Well, that was the devil's money you found on the road. And now that you ate the candy that you bought with it, the devil is inside you." And the next day, objects started flinging themselves against Eleonora. And bite and scratch marks started appearing on her face and arms and neck.
Yeah.
And she thought this was coming from the devil. This was a cool case, by the way, because some of this was filmed. And you could see that nobody was touching her, and she wasn't doing anything to herself. And sometimes the bite marks were accompanied by saliva. The saliva was analyzed, and its bacteriological content was different from Eleonora's.
Wow, that is bizarre.
Uh-huh.
That is really strange. Do you put that down to like the power of belief in that case, like her believing that like what her grandmother had told her about the devil, or
Yes, I think
what do you
that
make of that? Yeah,
that's one of the clearer cases suggesting a connection between the poltergeist type phenomena and the psychological state of the poltergeist victim.
yeah.
One of the subjects I studied, Ariel Farias in Buenos Aires, he had the ability to make tables rise under his fingers. He's like a poltergeist case in some respects. His phenomena started when he was 10 or 11 years old, and his father died unexpectedly. And then at that point, objects were flying around, mirrors were breaking, and so on. And even today, as an adult, when he gets agitated, things fly off shelves.
Really? Wow. You've seen this guy do that with tables? With
I
your
have
own
video.
eyes? Yeah. I think I've seen you with him maybe online, I possibly, but it seemed like really like an extraordinary guy. Like, so he could do that on command at will. Did he tell you like his technique or anything like that and how he went about doing it?
He was trying to figure it all out. What happened with
Yeah.
Ariel was that at the Parapsychological Institute in Buenos Aires, they had a sitter group at one point, and they were making the table do things as a group. And eventually, by a process of elimination, they discovered that the table was rising and doing its thing only when Ariel was present. And so they tried doing it just with Ariel, and he found, to his surprise, that he could make the table rise under his fingers. And so this was just an exploratory thing for him. He's not a professional psychic. He's a regular kind of guy, family man with a good job, interested in martial arts. Really nice guy. And he was pretty much able to do it on command, but he could be rattled. And in fact, he was brought to Australia. I was there with him to perform for a movie, a documentary that was being made. And the filmmakers did not know how to treat him, and Ariel did not respect his own fragility. And so when he was expected to perform under these artificial conditions and with a lot of pressure on him, he couldn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
But I've seen him do it on a number of occasions under very careful observation conditions.
How confident are you that there was, because I know you got that kind of skeptical mindset, you question things. How confident are you that there was no like fraud, nothing like that? Are you 100% sure that what he was doing was genuine phenomena?
Yeah, it's good. His hands are not sticky. He was, I could show you a video.
If you can send me one afterwards, maybe that would be great, and then we can kind of put it on the screen like during this. That would be great. But I mean, again, it's just so fascinating. It's a pity he couldn't do it during the martial arts to like his opponent. That would have been make them levitate up. That would have been something. But yeah, wow. Again, like, did he have other psychic things happening to him, like unintentionally, just in his life regularly, or did it seem to just manifest with the tables? Strangely enough.
Well, I mean, it manifested in the involuntary things like the flying
and the other objects,
yeah. But that was the only form in which she was able to do it more or less intentionally.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, it's so bizarre, right? That like it's just, what do we do with that? Like people's ability to do that with tables. What do you make of like people that claim to be able to levitate, or people that claim that others are able to levitate? Like, obviously there's the very notable case of Joseph of Cupertino.
I love that case.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard. It's very hard to dismiss that.
Yeah.
because witnesses were certainly not biased in favor of Joseph. He was a public relations nightmare for the Catholic Church. Ordinarily, it would have been contrary to their interest to canonize Joseph, because his physical appearance and behavior were so odd and repulsive. But so impressive. I mean, he could levitate outdoors in broad daylight. He could go up to the branch of a tree that ordinarily wouldn't support someone of his weight. On several occasions, he carried people with him. On one occasion, he cured a person of lunacy by shock therapy, apparently. 17th century version of shock therapy, carried him by his hair up to a branch of a tree.
Wow.
But many people saw this, people who were...
Yeah, like many, right? Lots.
Many. And they reported the same very odd kinds of things. When he levitated outdoors, his robes would not be disturbed by the wind. If it rained, his clothes would remain dry. If he levitated indoors around the altar, again, his robes would not move. He would not extinguish candles as he flew past. And it's important to note that Joseph was observed in flight, not just at the location he allegedly levitated to.
Yeah. Not just a very adept tree climber with people stumbling across him. He must have flown up there.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was like when he had a moment of ecstasy, right? Was there anything like that with Ariel? Was that his name? Ariel Ferris? Was there anything similar to that with him? Like, was it when he was in a certain mood, he was more successful with the tables? Because again, with Joseph, like, I think, he was feeling ecstasy or like some real great happiness, and he'd like just start floating on up. Was there anything like that with Ariel?
Well, he had his limitations for sure.
Like emotional.
When I went to Buenos Aires, there were 3 different days when we filmed him doing his thing. He was most effective on the first day. Then we cooled it for one day and then came back the next day and took a break and came back. He started to fatigue after a while. I mean, it's not that interesting a thing to do
if you do
all
it
you're
all the
doing
time.
is. But his experimenters in Buenos Aires were testing various things, and so that made some difference from one occasion to the next, so that they would be testing his EEGs. They would put him on scales and try different perspectives with video cameras placed all around him. So they would vary the experimental conditions in a way that kept it somewhat fresh for him. But he could get bored with it also. And eventually, he's, I think, just stopped doing this, because I don't mean this unkindly. He was a one-trick pony. I mean, that was his thing. That's what he was able to do. He wanted to understand his ability to do that. I'm not sure he ever did really achieve any deep understanding of it.
Yeah.
But he had fun exploring it for a time. I mean, it interested all of us that his hands got very cold when he did this.
Yeah, it's interesting. It became very cold. Yeah, because you sometimes hear about like hot hands when it comes to like healing and things, and other maybe phenomena as well. But the cold, I haven't heard that before, so that's really strange.
I hadn't heard that before either.
Yeah.
So there are 2 papers about Ariel in the Journal of Scientific Exploration.
Oh, cool. Nice. Do you know what they're called or anything like that? Or would you be able to maybe send me something?
I can send you the references.
Yeah. And I can try and I can try and help people find them as well if they're interested. Because it is fascinating, that stuff. Talking of saints as well, while we were on with Joseph doing extraordinary things, what do you make of the phenomenon bilocation? Do you have any thoughts on that? And it's like whether it's like an actual real thing, or is it like a kind of maybe more of an apparitional thing? Like,
I don't. If there's a substantial literature on that, I'm not aware of it. I know Carlos Mirabelli allegedly had the ability to be in two places at once.
Yeah, I don't know if there's substantial literature. I spoke to Diana Walsh-Pasulka, who's a professor of religion, and she talked about a few cases. I can't remember now off the top of my head. I think one was Maria, but I can't remember Maria of where, or I'm having a bit of a mind blank on it. But yeah, really weird phenomenon that. I don't really know what to make of it. I guess I wanted to ask you about another one, and another phenomena, another kind of extraordinary person that you worked with and spent time with and witnessed things happening with. It popped into my mind when you mentioned about the case, the Romanian girl, and she had that kind of saliva on her arm. So again, making that appear, if she did make that appear somehow subconsciously, her own body or consciousness or what have you, the explanatory framework, I don't know, but it made me think of obviously the Gold Leaf Lady that you wrote a book about. So can you talk a little bit about her and about that phenomenon, and assume that there's probably a lot of people watching or listening that have not come across her before or heard of that before?
Yeah, this is my favorite case for what will be obvious reason.
Yeah. And take your time as well, because I'm totally fascinated by it as well, and I'm sure lots of people will be too. So yeah, take as much time as you want to talk about this.
Katie Engelhart lived in Florida, on the east coast of Florida. A lovely person, functionally illiterate. She had only a first grade education. I mention this because among her abilities, when she was in a mediumistic trance, even though she couldn't write her name, or she could write her name, but she couldn't write sentences, she would write quatrains ostensibly from Nostradamus in medieval French.
Wow.
But the most remarkable ability in some ways was this. She also seemed to be, like Ariel, a kind of poltergeist victim, but it had to do with her marriage to her second husband. None of her psychic abilities, and they were considerable, emerged until she married Tom Engelhart. And it was apparently a difficult relationship. And at first, poltergeist-like things were happening. Objects were moving around, rearranging themselves. And one day, so the story goes, a carving set appeared out of nowhere. And Katie's husband said, well, what good is it if it isn't money? And then 2 days later, Katie's body started to break out in a golden colored foil, spontaneously and instantaneously. Now, this foil has been carefully analyzed. I've got tons of it.
Really?
Scraped it off her body. It's been analyzed. It's not gold, it's brass. So 80% copper, 20% zinc. Structurally indistinguishable from a kind of commercially available brass leaf that you can buy in art supply stores as an inexpensive way of gilding picture frame. But Katie was just having this stuff appear suddenly on her body. I would go out to dinner with her, be sitting across from her, and suddenly something would appear on her face. It was clear she didn't put her hands up there to place it there, it just appeared.
How small were the bits that would like appear?
It could be very tiny, and it could grow suddenly into a mass.
Really?
Several inches across. And sometimes her body would be covered extensively with it, on her legs, her arms, her face, her tongue. It's tempting to think that she sweats this out of her body, especially because sometimes her skin would glisten before the material appeared, but it would appear then suddenly. But people could be holding her hands, they'd see the glistening, and then suddenly there'd be this stuff on it. I think that she was not perspiring it or sweating it because she'd have to have lethal amounts of copper or zinc in her system to produce the quantities that she was producing. And medical examinations of her never showed any anomalies that would have suggested she had unusual levels of copper or zinc. Now, what I say about this is that we don't know what's going on here. We don't know whether it's a case of materialization, whether Katie was just creating material de novo, so to speak, or whether she was apporting it from some other location, whether it was disappearing from our supply stores. Who knows?
Yeah.
It's funny, I went to Johns Hopkins University Material Science Department asking for their opinion about it. They were intrigued initially about the phenomena, and they looked at it carefully, and they concluded that structurally there was nothing different between it and commercially available brass foil. And then they lost interest, which I thought was a peculiar reaction. But in the way I understand it, because they're material scientists, and as material, it wasn't particularly novel. They were assuming unjustifiably that if it was paranormally produced, it had to have some really exotic structural feature, which is a non sequitur.
So they just assumed, it must be fraud because it's the same kind of material that you can get easily. So there you go, case closed. Yeah, the lack of curiosity.
So I don't know what's going on there, whether it's an apport or materialization, but I think I have some kind of psychological explanation of it. I think we can understand the psychogenesis of the phenomenon because Katie's husband wanted something valuable.
Yeah.
And Katie was giving him symbolically what he wanted, but she was giving him fool's gold.
Yeah.
This was one way for Katie to express her anger and resentment against her husband. She was giving him the psychic finger, basically, is what she was doing. And it was a way of avoiding the responsibility of being able to actually produce gold foil. I mean, she didn't want to bear the responsibility of being the goose that laid the golden egg, for God's sake. That would be a very weighty responsibility. But Katie is someone I believe was a totally honest person. She was a lovely, unpretentious person. She also had great ESP ability. She would work with the police to solve crimes. On one occasion, she was working with police, I think in Atlanta. They showed her a picture of the victim, and Katie's body broke out in scratch marks on her face and arms. And it turned out, although Katie didn't know this, that the victim had been fleeing from her assailant, and in so doing was running through some bushes, and her face and arms got scratched.
Wow.
On another occasion, she was shown a picture of the victim, or the gravesite of the victim, I can't remember which. And Katie bent over, and suddenly there was a big welt on the back of her head. Katie hadn't been told this, but the victim was killed by blunt force instrument to the back of the head. In another case, Katie was brought in to help solve a robbery on Johns Island near Vero Beach, where she lived in Florida. Johns Island is a place where there are a lot of very expensive homes. And there had been a massive jewelry heist in one of the homes. And I talked to the head of security on the island. He said he had been able to solve the crime. He had heard about Katie's abilities, and he figured, what the hell, it couldn't hurt to bring her in.
Mm-hmm.
And so what he did, he drove around John's Island and always took his feet off the gas pedal as he coasted past the homes. He didn't want to give away which home might be the one that had been burgled. He wanted to see if Katie could identify it. She not only identified the home, she described the decor inside. The police thought, or the head of security thought there were two thieves. Katie described three, and she gave him so much detail that at one point he began to treat her as a suspect. But eventually, the information that Katie provided allowed him to solve the crime and recover several $100,000 worth of stolen jewelry. And as they were driving away, Katie started to feel nauseous and said, "Do you smell marijuana?" And the people in the car said, "No." And she said, "I also hear helicopters." And nobody in the car, nobody else heard helicopters. Katie said, "Well, in 2 weeks, you will." And the head of security made a note of this at the time. Then 2 weeks later, almost to the hour, 25 bales of pot washed ashore. And there were federal helicopters flying overhead. Now, it's not unprecedented for pot to wash ashore in Florida, I'm told. But still, the fact remains that Katie nailed it almost to the hour.
Yeah. Wow.
So this is the kind of person that Katie was.
Yeah. Incredible. And I guess she would have been the kind of person that this stuff was always happening to her, whether it was incredible stuff like that or more mundane things. I would imagine it was kind of always something.
Well, always something, but she had moments of quietude. And in fact, the afflictions of the golden foil was not constant. She had no control over that.
Okay. Yeah.
This was an affliction. And we were unable to draw any clear causal lines between her psychological state and the foil. She could be upset and nothing would happen. She could be in great spirits and the foil could be erupting continually. And it was often embarrassing. I mean, she might have gone to a convenience store and was trying to check out with the cashier, and suddenly stuff appears on her face. I mean, what do you say in a case like that?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those truly mind-boggling cases, just extreme, just so wild, and yet so incredibly fascinating. Did that continue to happen until, like the end of her? I don't. She's not still. Yeah. Did that happen until the end of her life?
I lost touch with her when her principal investigator, Bert Schwartz, passed away. But my impression was that this never left her.
Mm. And do you know, had she been having, again, I know the bronze thing or the brass had been happening since the comment from her husband, but had she been having kind of psychic experiences throughout her entire life? Or do you know, like, when they started? Was there something?
They started when she got married to her second husband.
Oh, she didn't really have anything at all before that?
No.
Really interesting. And you said they didn't have a great relationship as well, so like
it was a difficult relationship.
So do you think, there's something? Does that kind of give you? Do you take anything from that? What does that tell you? I'm trying to figure it out as I'm sitting there, like trying to think it through. But did you get anything from that, like the correlation there?
Well, I mean, I think it's clear that this was the psychogenesis, at least, of the golden foil. And apparently everything else, all her other psychic abilities. It just required a trigger to get them to manifest.
But he wasn't.
This again reinforces why I think it's important to look at real life cases and to study the natural.
You're not going to find that in the lab. Yeah, you're not going to suddenly come across somebody having gold brass foil pouring out of their.
Well,
skin.
That's why the television show Unsolved Mysteries didn't have much success with Katie.
Right, they filmed with her.
They ignored all my suggestions about how to make her feel as comfortable as possible. And what do you know? They didn't get results.
Did you get it on film?
Between moments when they were filming,
Mm.
Katie was erupting in fun.
Yeah, it's like this trickster phenomenon, this elusive stuff that seems to outwit our attempts to quantify it and to study it. Did you manage to get it on film? Like any of it when it was happening? Her, like, I don't know how to even word it.
I caught it once.
I suppose you tried zooming in on it and like seeing, like, if you can see any detail of this happening.
Well, that's what I did. Often her skin would feel an irritation before it happened.
Right.
And we only had one camera on her this occasion. And something was going on near her eye. And she would rub her eye and look at her finger to see if anything had come off. But when she took her finger off her face, it went out of the cameras. I had zoomed in on her face. So you couldn't see whether Katie was putting something on her finger and then applying it to her eye.
Mm-hmm.
I know she didn't have anything to dip her finger into because we had examined her very carefully beforehand. But what we caught on video was at one point when she moved her finger away, there was a spot of foil there. There had been nothing there before. She was looking to see if she could put something onto her finger, but she wasn't putting something onto her finger when she took it out of the camera. So it's compromised evidence.
Yeah, yeah. And it would just come out from anywhere on her skin, and you said you've got some of it, like, so it didn't like melt as soon as somebody else touched it or anything like that. It wasn't just some disappearing bronze foil. Like, you still have it. You still have this physical.
I have lots of it. That's one of the reasons I'm inclined to think it's not a materialization, because all the other evidence suggesting materialization is that things that materialize subsequently dematerialize.
Mm-hmm.
So again, that remains a mystery about the case. I should say that I've donated a lot of my research materials to Rice University in Texas, to their Archives of the Impossible. And they have some of Katie's foil there as well. So people can access that material if they want.
Yeah. That's so cool. And so strange. And yeah, have you ever come across anybody else that had a similar thing happening with like something seemingly no,
seems to be one of a kind.
Yeah. Wow. So bizarre. And you get, again, just to state the obvious, but you were essentially 100%, you're 100% convinced that there was no fraud there, and again, obviously there's no normal explanation.
Yes. Yeah. And wow. I'm not the only person to have observed it. I mean, one of the things that came out in the Unsolved Mysteries segment, there are a lot of people who have firsthand experiences of just holding Katie's hand and arms and seeing the stuff materialize right before their eyes.
Wow. Yeah. And
I should also add that the material is very clingy, so it's not easy to manipulate. We Unsolved Mysteries brought a magician to check it out, and he had great difficulty moving it around.
Yeah. It like kind of sticks to the skin a little bit, and not easy to place and put where you want it and everything like that.
And of course, we examined Katie before we started filming her.
Yeah. Yeah. No, like I say, it's kind of to state the obvious, because I know that you are taking the stuff in that vein, but yeah, just for the people out there that are listening to this and saying no way, I prefer for you to say clearly, yeah, that you were you were convinced and you were looking for that kind of thing. I think another case that you covered in that book was KR, a policeman from Annapolis. Can you talk about that?
Oh, I figured, well, a policeman would be a good observer. So he reported that if he placed a photograph, a portion of a photograph on a sheet or pillowcase or his leg, that the other part of the photo would appear on his leg or on the sheet. I'd never heard of this one before.
Yeah.
And I figured, well, as a policeman, he's probably a reliable observer. And I went there with my wife, and we tried various times to place objects, photographs on sheets and pillowcases, and even on his leg. And in no case did anything appear next to it.
Right.
But the policeman insisted he was seeing things.
Yeah.
And it showed me one has to...
he was still insisting he was seeing it when you were looking at the same thing and saying, I don't see anything.
As I recall, you probably read it more recently than I wrote it. He didn't even know what the other half of the photo was of it in many of these cases. I remember one of the photographs I put on his leg was of the bear pits in Bern, Switzerland. But you couldn't see from the photograph. My wife was looking over the wall of the bear pit. And KR said, I think there were cars or vehicles that she was looking at, but he didn't get it at all.
Yeah.
So there was nothing psychic going on as far as I could see.
Did he come across as genuine other than that? Like, did he seem like he was intentionally trying to, defraud it, or like, what was the impression you got from him? Why was he under?
No, I didn't think it was a case of fraud. I think he wanted me to be very careful about preserving his anonymity about it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he knew what would happen if he came out as believing that this occurred.
Especially if he can't back it up. So do you think it was delusional? What do you think was happening there?
I wish I knew. He creeped me out. Parapsychological stuff doesn't creep me out. Creeped me out a little bit.
Okay. What about Ted Serios? Was it the same kind of story with him, or did you?
Oh no, Ted's the real deal.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about Ted and what you witnessed with him? What he could do?
What I witnessed is not as important as what was documented by Jewel Eisenbud. But I was able, after Jewel died, to run some tests of my own with Ted. And we got some anomalies on Polaroid film. But so your viewers know, Ted Serios was a Chicago elevator operator, bellhop, who experimented with hypnosis and making images appear on a Polaroid film. Now, the significance of using Polaroid film is that whatever psychic results he allegedly got on the film couldn't be explained as darkroom tricks. But Ted's best results came from when he was, for example, put in a shielded Faraday cage, separated from the camera. Camera was outside the cage. Mm-hmm. And he would be asked to impress on the Polaroid film some target in a sealed envelope. And he would
he didn't even look at the target. He's like remote viewing the target and then putting that remotely, imprinting it on the Polaroid film.
And even when he wasn't getting those kinds of results with hidden targets, he was still able to make anomalous images appear on the Polaroid film without touching it. Of course, he liked to look through the rolled black cardboard that came with the Polaroid film. He would put it up to the camera lens and look through it like this. And some people claim that he would put an image hidden in the gizmo and put it up to the camera lens. But the hidden image in the gizmo hypothesis doesn't work. It doesn't explain how Ted was able to make images appear when he was separated from the camera, sometimes at considerable distances. If Ted would have to have been right up against the camera lens to capture the image of what was inside the gizmo. Otherwise, he'd be taking a picture of the gizmo. But that isn't the kind of image that he was getting on the film. And sometimes he was getting blackies and whiteys, that is, completely overexposed or completely underexposed results. The underexposed results would be anomalous because they were in situations when there was plenty of light. The overexposed ones were anomalous because there was no corresponding bright light that would have caused the picture to have been overexposed.
Mm-hmm.
So Jewel Eisenbud got many results like this. And what complicates the case of Ted Serios is that he was a serious alcoholic. And he would become more unruly and difficult to manage as he continued to drink.
Right.
And so the sessions with Ted would get a little crazy as time went on.
Yeah. But the phenomena, again, as far as you're concerned, was real. And did it change like how accurate or impressive the images were based on, as you say, like distance, how close he was to the camera?
Well, what's most interesting about some of the images is that they were distorted in ways that could be explained in terms of darkroom tricks or any kind of obvious trick. For example, Ted produced an image on a Polaroid camera of Jewel Eisenbud's ranch house. And it depicted the ranch house in a condition which it had never been in one case, or in a condition in which it wasn't in at the time of the photograph, but was, I forget if it was earlier or later.
Mm.
So there were distortions in the images that were very mysterious. It's not clear why he would have gotten something so similar but so unlike the object at the same time. Jewel Eisenbud was a psychiatrist, and of course he had a field day trying to interpret the results psychoanalytically.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah, what you do with it again, right? What do you do with that kind of stuff? What other like extraordinary cases and phenomena did you cover in the Gold Leaf Lady? Is there anything that comes to mind that you think is worth talking about right now? Like,
well, there were the book of the Gold Leaf Lady is about successes and failures. It's about some good cases, the good cases being Serios and Katie, and another good case, Dennis Lee, a guy from California who had the ability. He's apparently specialized in making mobiles move.
Okay.
Now they're very labile objects, and so they're difficult to study. But his movements were sometimes quite dramatic. When I met up with him at a hotel in San Francisco, we went into a room where he was going to demonstrate his ability, and there was a huge chandelier. He apparently made the chandelier move. I mean, it started moving when he said he was going to make it move. There were no breezes in the room. So that was impressive right off the bat. But he was brought to New York where we could study him. And unfortunately, the person who was financing the operation had some bitterness toward me from a previous case where I believe that the subject he was endorsing was a complete fraud, Joe Newsom. And that's written about in the Gold Leaf Lady as well. It's an interesting case, the case of Joey Newsom. But the case of Dennis Lee, his person who financed this, Alex Image, undermined Dennis's confidence so thoroughly and battered him so badly psychologically that he didn't really perform well at all. And so the story even has a tragic ending, but I won't go into that now. So the book, The Gold Leaf Lady, is about what is genuinely psychic, what sometimes looks psychic, but isn't. And I like to think it's an interesting character study of a number of different kinds of subjects, fraudulent and genuine.
Yeah, which it's important to have that kind of looking at the complete cross section of this stuff. I know we can't say for sure, the question I'm about to ask you, I know we can't say for sure what the answer is by any means, but I'm just, again, your kind of personal feelings on this after all of your experience and research and things you've witnessed. I'm talking about the limits when it comes to psi phenomena. Like, do you personally, again, I know that we can't say that, so I'll get that out of the way first. I know we can't say it's potentially unlimited. Do you have any musings other than that? Do you kind of perceive any kind of limit? Is the strongest phenomena you've seen the kind of things that we've already talked about today? Is there anything else that jumps out at you? And yeah, what do you think is possible, essentially?
Well, a couple of things about that. First, I'll
just mention, just before you jump in, I'll mention that when we talk next, we'll kind of we're going to do another interview in a couple of in like a month or so. We'll get that time. We can touch on the idea of super psi or living agent psi versus survival, that kind of classic debate. We can get more into that next time. So that's going to be, again, the limits of psi. But yeah, please, I'd love to hear what you have to say for now. Sorry.
I think we have to be careful about supposing that we can open the door to the paranormal, even if we're just opening a crack, and then decide that it can't be opened any further. We need some reason to suppose that it can only be opened a little bit. At our current level of ignorance, which I think is considerable, as far as we know, if we open the door to the paranormal, even as a thought experiment, we have to open it all the way and see what happens. It's not clear what a really large-scale manifestation of psychic functioning would be, unless it's the kind of reordering of events, or ordering of events as in synchronicities or in Schmidt's experiments with pre-recorded targets. Other than that, we've got levitations, we've got apparent materializations, we've got massive object movements and poltergeist phenomena. I mean, in poltergeist phenomena, think about all the cases where people report independently, by the way, and often at different times in history without any extant literature on the subject to appeal to, the raining of excrement inside a house. Where does that come from?
Yeah.
Why would people report the raining of excrement or the raining of stones inside a house? That's a large-scale manifestation. Oh, there's a really good book on Australian poltergeist cases where large boulders get thrown into a house from outside.
What are, in your opinion, what are the obstacles and or requirements in order for psi phenomena to become accepted by, say, the mainstream science, or just, the masses in general? But that kind of is led, I guess, by science. So what will it take for the majority of scientists to begin to accept this, or at least accept that there's something to look into in greater detail and to take seriously?
There would have to be an epidemic of moral courage. One of the things, when I got into all of this, I still believe that scientists and philosophers were committed to discovering the truth, and that they wouldn't mind having been wrong so long as learning that brought them closer to the truth.
Yeah.
I now realize how colossally naive I was, because since getting into the data of parapsychology, I've discovered more examples of intellectual cowardice and dishonesty than I had previously thought possible. I've come to understand that intelligence can be as much a liability as a virtue. Sometimes all it does is to afford people more complex ways of screwing up and making mistakes. I've also come to believe that most academic, or many academic and other professions, are deficient in the one virtue that ideally is supposed to characterize the field. What I mean is, philosophers are not wise, scientists are not objective, psychologists are not perceptive, psychiatrists are crazy, historians lack perspective, lawyers don't care about justice, physicians aren't healers, artists lack taste. Probably can go on. And the reason I think I understand this is that the kinds of moral or intellectual problems I uncovered are weaknesses that I was demonstrating myself at various times. I mean, before I got into the data of parapsychology at all, I'm sure I would have contemptuously dismissed a lot of it, even though I knew that I didn't really have a command of what the evidence was. And even after I wrote my first book on ESP and PK, I was content with my moderate radicalism and was willing for a time to diminish the significance of the evidence from physical mediumship, as if I knew what that evidence was. And that's why it was such a revelation to me to discover how good it really is, and how impressive the best cases are.
And that, I hope, is something we're going to be able to talk about in much more detail next time, the physical mediumship and the evidence for survival, and all of those kind of things. That's totally fascinating. And that kind of stuff is really mind-boggling. And when I first came across the evidence for that, like that shook me up a bit. Like, that was pretty hard to, swallow. One thing as well that's kind of really hard for me to get my head around, or I haven't even tried, to be honest, is astrology. Something I just very skeptical about when I first hear it. It's one of, as you research these areas of parapsychology, like, there's always the next thing, right? That's like, oh, okay, I've managed to kind of integrate that essentially into my worldview. Now there's always something else that seems too far, too mind-boggling, the boggle factor. Astrology, yeah, something I still haven't really looked into. I'm still very skeptical of that. I have had a couple of serious-minded listeners and patrons that have expressed an interest in that, and have told me I should look into it. I understand that your wife has done some experiments with that and maybe has had some success with that in terms of like guiding some professional sports teams and things to success. Can you talk about that a bit and talk about if astrology is something I should be taking seriously?
All I can say is that Gina has dazzled me. Whether I'm dealing with a very psychic person, and that's all that's going on, as if that's all. I think it's more than that, because I see how she is very careful about calculating the person's actual time of birth, the time where the major events in a person's life fall out on the chart wheel exactly where they should be. But Gina, in fact, is a professional psychologist. She was teaching psychology at the University of Novi Sad in Yugoslavia. And she was always interested in astrology and was dismayed at how stupid so much of what she read was. She decided to learn it for herself and studied with a very interesting person in Switzerland and used it in sports. It became very handy when her country was involved in a civil war. because she had a real salary.
Mm-hmm.
But Gina had access to the birth dates and times of all the players, all the coaches, all the officials. She worked for uh, Yugoslavian and Asian and some other European football teams. She could predict when goals would be scored. And when she moved to the US to be with me, she was still communicating with a coach in China. And I would watch her spread out all the charts to all the players on the team and figure out what strategies the coach should adopt at certain points in the game. For example, on one occasion, she saw that the regular goalkeeper was going to have a bad day, and she advised that the coach put in the reserve goalkeeper because he was going to have a very lucky day. Really? Now, that's something you don't do in professional football unless the regular goalkeeper is disabled.
Mm-hmm.
And the coach ignored her the first time, and they lost very badly. Gina said, same situation applies to the next two games against, by the way, better funded teams from Shanghai and Beijing. And they won both games handily by shutouts. Now, what I found particularly interesting about this was that Gina hadn't predicted that the reserve goalkeeper would play well. She predicted that the goalkeeper would have a very lucky day. And in fact, against these better funded teams, so long as he was in goal, the opposing teams couldn't make a shot on goal. Everything was going high or wide. So his modest ability wasn't being tested. He was having a very lucky day.
Wow.
But ordinarily what Gina would do would be to say to the coach, well, such and such a player will be particularly effective if you put him in at this point in the game, this moment in the game. Or at this point in the game, be very careful about what the opposing team is going to do. And when the coach paid attention to Gina's recommendation, they did very, very well. And her teams were always doing very well. And personally, we use it all the time. We don't gamble unless I live in Las Vegas. Your viewers should know that. We won't gamble unless Gina sees that it's a favorable time for gambling.
Wow. Yeah, that's really fascinating. So it's based, she bases it on these kind of celestial events and alignments and all of that kind of thing. And also when you said about the goalkeeper having a lucky day, it kind of made me think back to what you were saying earlier with the idea of very lucky people and things. It could be kind of a form of macro PK. So, maybe on some level she's perceiving that this guy is, going to have a day where he subconsciously is able to influence things more. Really.
I don't think I'm just married to a witch, but I mean, I don't doubt that Gina's psychic, but she's also very skillful. She knows a lot of astronomy.
Yeah.
A lot of what she does is very technical. I don't have a problem with the idea that our environment affects us in a variety of ways.
Yeah. I can agree. I can get on board with that. The idea that like what's happening right now can affect what's happening right now. I guess I struggle more with the idea of like what was happening when I was born could still be affecting things now. But I don't know if that's actually what the real version of astrology looks at or not.
I don't think so. But
so
maybe you
more
should
about
interview Gina
now.
sometime.
Yeah. I mean, for sure, it sounds really interesting. So you think it's something I should be taking seriously? It's something that's worth looking at, and yeah.
Well, all I can say is I've tested Gina in various ways. When we take a trip, Gina determines what's a good time to leave.
Yeah.
I think in the Gold Leaf Lady, I describe a case where we were going to drive a long way to go someplace, and ordinarily that route is filled with obstacles, bad traffic, a lot of road work, and so on. Gina picked a time, and we just coasted through it. I mean, we've accumulated many such instances, and so there's a kind of cumulative argument in favor of Gina's ability to use the tools of astrology to make these kinds of predictions.
Yeah,
it's not a deterministic view that she has. It's more like weather forecasting. Mm-hmm. She perceives trends. She figures out. I'm reluctant to be speaking for her because she's really good at this. In fact, yes, I'll leave it there. I recommend your viewers take a look at the last chapter of The Gold Leaf Lady. There are a number of instances in there that I think are provocative, but nothing quite as impressive as what she did with the soccer teams.
Yeah, wow. But as you said earlier, I guess sometimes it's hard to know what psychic, facility is at play. And I suppose, like you said, like you have no doubt she's very psychic. And sometimes I guess it must be hard to say, like, is that due to her work in whatever she's doing with the astrology stuff? Or is it simply that, she was aware of something that was going to happen or had a gut feeling, that kind of stuff. But yeah, either way, really fascinating. And I'll look into that more. And
I will say that she has undermine my gut level initial resistance to accepting astrology.
Yeah,
she has some skills which I don't fully understand.
Well, that's powerful to hear. Really, really fascinating, and I will look into it. So she, as well, aside from the astrology stuff, you said you're convinced she's psychic. Are you also psychic? Have you had any interesting psychic experiences that you want to mention before we wrap this up?
I don't pretend to be adept at any particular.
I guess asterisk on that as well would be, in a very brief answer, do you think we're all psychic to some degree? Do you think it's something that's innate in all of us, in the same sense that we can all do maths to some level, we can all have some level of creativity? Do you think it's something along those lines? And then back to the original question of, have you had any interesting experiences?
Well, I'm open to that view, and I think it's one of the live options that we need to take seriously is psychic functioning analogous to metabolic functioning, or is it more like the ability to play piano, the ability to drive a car? These are the big questions that we don't know. And it's one of the reasons I said that lab experiments are ludicrously premature. We don't know what we're trying to import into the lab.
Yeah, so in terms of your own personal experiences with it, is there anything you fancy sharing, or nothing to report?
I've done well on some computerized PK tests, but I wouldn't look to me for compelling evidence of PK.
It's not so much the compelling evidence, but I always love to ask my guests about, personal experiences. There's something different about that when it's happened to you yourself and you've had that kind of moment where suddenly you had either a precognition or you essentially read somebody's mind. I know that's not really how telepathy works, but you kind of got this information that you wouldn't normally have been able to access with your normal senses. And it's just interesting have you ever bent a spoon, for example? This is a fun kind of thing that lots of people have done or claim to have done.
No, I haven't.
No, have you ever tried?
No, I haven't.
No, me neither.
You think I would have, but I don't like group events like that.
Yeah. Well, you can try at home, right? Like it's possible. I've spoken to people that have done it at home. I've tried a few times and had no success whatsoever. But I've been told it's possible to do it home alone, as it were.
Well, maybe I'll try it when we're done today.
Yeah. Well, let me know if you have any success. But you're right about the group thing. I did speak to Lloyd Auerbach. You must be familiar with Lloyd, and
sure.
I did a full kind of interview with him where he talked in detail, advising people how to set up a kind of spoon bending party and how that should go, and he gave loads of advice for that. So that was fun.
I think the group consciousness helps with that kind of thing.
Yeah. like elevating the mood and everybody's feeling.
I'm more of a rugged individualist. I like to keep to myself.
Yeah, I guess I have something in common with that. Thank you so much for your time today, Steve. I really, really appreciate you giving me so much of your time and you sharing so much of your experiences and your study, your work that you've done in these areas. It's so fascinating. I'm looking forward to talking again very soon, where we're going to dive into talking more about, the survival of consciousness and the evidence in that area. And I'm sure, we're probably going to have some differences of opinion, but it's going to be fun. So I'm really looking forward to that. For now, though, do you have any last words, any message you want to leave with people that have watched and listened to this today?
Just keep an open mind.
Couldn't agree more. Keep an open mind, stay curious, and keep looking, keep searching. Thank you again, Steve. I really appreciate you, and I look forward to doing it again.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you to Stephen Browday for talking with me. Thank you to our amazing patrons for helping us to keep the podcast alive. And thank you for listening. Please see the description for relevant links, including to Stephen's books and other interviews you may enjoy. Please subscribe to continue unraveling the universe with us. And if you want to help us keep putting out content, please consider a monthly contribution via Patreon. Thank you.